The galaxy operates on a fundamental law, the law of sequentiality. For every race from the core to the rim, a second is a second. Gravity dictates the flow, and entropy dictates the end. But the Hegemony's record suggests that the humans, or Terrans, have found a way to treat time not as a river, but as a resource. They possess a biological glitch that allows them to stretch a single moment until it snaps. My name is Archivist Kael. As a senior researcher for the Hegemony, I have spent decades analyzing the tactical data from the Soul skirmishes. I have seen the telemetry of the Battle of the Oort Cloud, where a single human pilot, a woman named Sarah Vance, navigated a debris field at relativistic speeds that should have been mathematically impossible for an organic mind. She didn't have a faster computer than ours. She had something far more dangerous, the flow state. This is Nova Frontiers. Today, we are opening the restricted files on the human overclock. We once believed that the lack of FTL biology in humans made them a low-tier species, slow, fragile, and predictable. We were wrong. The records show that when a human's life is on the line, their nervous system undergoes a structural transformation. They're the only species in the known universe that can manually overclock their own consciousness to the point of permanent damage just to survive a few extra seconds. We didn't just find a new neighbor. We found a species that treats the laws of physics as mere suggestions when the adrenaline spikes. Before we dissect the biomechanics of this terrifying ability, make sure to subscribe to Nova Frontiers and hit the like button. Your support allows us to continue declassifying these records. Drop a comment below. If you were an alien commander and saw a human ship moving faster than your AI could track, what would be your first order? When the Hegemony's biological mappers first scanned the human physiology, the results were flagged as a systemic error. To the rest of the sentient collective, the brain is a delicate instrument of logic, a soft crystalline structure requiring a steady, rhythmic pulse of nutrient-rich fluids to maintain equilibrium. Most species operate in a symphony of measured, predictable responses. But as Archivist Kael's findings reveal, the human brain is not an instrument. It is a combustion engine. When a Terran enters a high-stakes scenario, their internal chemistry undergoes a violent, almost suicidal transformation that defies every law of evolutionary stability. Digital reconstructions of captured Terran pilots show the cocktail of volatile hormones flooding their systems, primarily adrenaline and norepinephrine. In any other known species, such a massive chemical surge would result in immediate cardiac rupture or a total neural blackout. To a human, however, this surge acts as a bridge to a higher state of existence. Their pupils dilate to capture photons at a rate that should be physically impossible for organic lenses, and their heart rate triples, forcing oxygen into muscle tissue at pressures that would crack the exoskeleton of a virgin warrior. The most terrifying change recorded by the Hegemony is the neural firing rate. Under normal conditions, a human thinks at a manageable speed, but in this overclock state, their neurons begin firing in a synchronized, high-frequency burst pattern. They aren't just thinking faster. They're processing more frames per second than the universe intended for a carbon-based life form. To a pilot like Sarah Vance, incoming plasma bolts, traveling at velocities that appear as a blur to our most advanced sensors, begin to look like slow-moving droplets of light. She sees the gaps. She sees the trajectory. She sees the future not because of psychic ability, but because she is living 10 seconds for every one of ours. But this power comes at a price that no sane species would ever pay. The Archivist reports detail microscopic tears in human muscle fibers and the scorching of their neural pathways during these events. Their own biology begins to cook itself from the inside out. Humans are literally burning their future lifespan to survive the next 30 seconds. It is a biological debt paid in blood and agony. When Hegemony medical droids first saw a human's brain temperature spike by nearly 4 degrees, they moved in to terminate the simulation, assuming a fatal seizure. They were wrong. The human wasn't dying. They were just getting started. They looked at their captors not with the eyes of a sentient being, but with the focused, predatory gaze of a creature that had successfully decoupled its consciousness from the slow, agonizing crawl of linear time. To the Hegemony High Command, the most disturbing aspect of the human overclock is not the biology, but the architecture of the human perception. Archivist Kael's research indicates that while the rest of the Galactic Collective relies on predictive logic arrays, building computers to handle the speeds their organic minds cannot, humans take the opposite approach. Most species are passengers in their own machines of war, providing the intent while the machine provides the execution. The Terrans, however, treat their technology as a mere extension of their screaming nerves. During the skirmish at the Titan Gate, Hegemony forces witnessed a Terran interceptor squad engage an automated defense grid. The grid, capable of calculating 3 million variables per millisecond, should have eliminated the intruders in seconds. Instead, it was a dance. The telemetry logs recovered by Kael show that the Terrans weren't using their flight computers for evasive maneuvers. In fact, they had manually overridden the safety limiters that prevent high-G turns, maneuvers that would liquefy the internal organs of any other pilot. But the humans were leaning into the trauma, utilizing a biological automation they call muscle memory. This state allows the human body to act before the conscious mind can even register the stimulus. By the time the Hegemony defense grid had calculated where the human ship should be, the pilot had already felt the shift in momentum and adjusted. They were reacting to the present while the Hegemony's AI was still stuck calculating the past. Kael's analysis suggests that humans do not perceive time as a single, unbroken thread, but as a series of expandable bubbles. In moments of extreme trauma, their subconscious mind seizes control of the clock. This is an evolutionary defense mechanism birthed in the tall grass of their ancestral plains, designed to help a primate outthink a predator in the heartbeat before the strike. The Terrans have refined this primitive terror into a weaponized state of being. What makes this truly dangerous is their ability to share this state. Kael observed that when a human commander enters the flow, they communicate in short, clipped bursts of data that other humans interpret with frightening speed. On the Hegemony bridge, officers were still translating the initial engagement signal when the entire Terran fleet had already shifted into a pincer formation. They moved as a single, overclocked organism, a collective of minds all burning at the same frantic, impossible temperature. The most disturbing element of the human overclock, as documented in Archivist Kael's recovered logs, is not the speed, it is the intent. In a hegemony, all sentient life is governed by the principle of biological preservation. It is the highest logic. When a system overheats, it must be throttled. When a limb is crushed, the organism must retreat. This is the foundation of cosmic stability. But the Terrans possess a psychological glitch that allows them to bypass the survival instinct entirely, a phenomenon Kael identifies as the red line. During the forensic recovery of the black box from the wrecked cruiser Indomitable, the Hegemony discovered a haunting example of this paradox. A single human engineer had been trapped within a leaking reactor core. According to every medical model in the galaxy, the radiation levels should have induced immediate cellular collapse and cognitive failure. Any other species would have spent their final moments in a state of primal panic or total incapacitation. Instead, the records show the engineer's heart rate stabilizing into a rhythmic, haunting cadence. As his skin began to blister and his internal organs failed, his focus actually sharpened. Kael notes that this is the secondary phase of the overclock, a state where the human mind identifies a goal so intensely that it begins to ignore the catastrophic feedback loops of the body. The engineer did not just fix the containment leak. He did so with a precision that surpassed the ship's own repair drones. He moved with a robotic fluidity, his fingers dancing across a console that was literally melting beneath his touch. The analysis suggests the human was experiencing a total sensory shutdown of everything extraneous to the mission. He could not feel the heat. He could not hear the sirens. He had reduced his entire universe down to a single sequence of binary choices: fix or fail. This hyperfocus is a selective blindness that allows humans to achieve miracles at the cost of their very existence. Kael's team analyzed the neural activity in those final moments and found that the pleasure centers of the brain were firing alongside the pain receptors. This leads to a terrifying conclusion for the hegemony. One cannot intimidate a species that finds a strange, distorted version of peace while their physical form is being torn apart. Psychological warfare tactics designed to induce flight only serve to trigger the overclock in the Terran ranks. By threatening their lives, the hegemony was not forcing a surrender. They were simply handing the humans the keys to their own hidden potential. Every time the pressure increased, the humans didn't break. They simply shifted into a higher gear, leaving the hegemony's understanding of combat psychology in the dust. Archivist Kael's attempts to simulate the human perspective during an overclock event resulted in multiple digital crashes. The hegemony's processors simply could not reconcile the conflicting data streams. To understand the human now, one must understand how they radically filter reality. In a standard state, human senses are remarkably limited. They see a narrow spectrum of light and hear a restricted range of frequencies. But during the overclock, the brain performs a feat of radical sensory reprioritization. Humans call it tunnel vision, but Kael identifies it as a sophisticated biological data compression algorithm that allows them to ignore 99% of the universe to master the 1% that matters. Kael studied a recording from a Terran ground soldier during the breach of the Xylos fortress. The soldier was under heavy suppressive fire, surrounded by the screams of the dying and the roar of collapsing masonry. In any standard sensory model, this environment is a white noise dead zone, a place where logic dies and only panic remains. Yet, the soldier's internal telemetry showed that his brain had effectively muted the sound of the explosions. He wasn't hearing the war. He was hearing the specific mechanical click of an overheating plasma rifle 300 meters away. He wasn't seeing the smoke. He was seeing the subtle shimmer of heat distortion that betrayed a cloaked assassin's position. This is what Kael calls the sensory distortion field. By narrowing their focus, humans effectively increase the resolution of their reality. While the hegemony views a wide field and sees many things poorly, the human overclock acts as a biological microscope. They trade their peripheral awareness for a precision within their direct line of sight that borders on the supernatural. This allows them to perform what hegemony analysts call impossible ballistics. Kael watched this soldier fire a projectile weapon, a primitive kinetic device, and hit a moving target through a gap in the armor that was only open for 0.04 seconds. The human didn't guess. He didn't get lucky. Because he had slowed his internal clock and compressed his sensory input, that tiny window appeared to him as a wide, yawning aperture. He had all the time in the world to breathe, aim, and squeeze. To the rest of the galaxy, the shot was a miracle. To the human, it was a routine execution. This ability to manipulate their own perception of the moment makes every individual human a potential anomaly on the battlefield. As Kael's report concludes, you cannot predict an enemy who is experiencing a different version of time than you are. While the hegemony is calculating the probability of a hit, the human has already lived through the moment of impact and moved on to the next target. Archivist Kael's investigation eventually turned away from the laboratory and toward the dusty records of Earth's deep past. The question haunting the Hegemony High Council was simple. Why? Why would nature of all the species with a built-in self-destruct switch that grants them the powers of a machine? To find the answer, Kael dug into the Terran fossil record and their primitive psychological myths. He discovered that the human overclock is not a modern technological development, but a vestigial echo from a time when humans were neither the masters of their tools nor the apex predators of their world. The archivist identified the root of this ability in the persistence hunt. Millions of years ago, Humans would track prey for days across scorched plains, pushing their bodies past the point of exhaustion. They used their minds to override the physical reality of failing muscles and screaming lungs. This deep-seated genetic memory is what allows a modern human to sit in a starfighter and push into the red line. Their ancestors ran until their hearts nearly burst to feed their tribes. The modern Terran runs through data streams and tactical grids with the same desperate, lethal intensity. This is not a combat reflex, Kael argues. It is ancestral trauma converted into a weapon. The Hegemony found records of berserkers and trance warriors in ancient human history. Individuals who could sustain mortal wounds and keep fighting because their brains had decided that death was a secondary concern to the objective. This will to power over their own flesh is what makes them an existential threat. Most species evolve to fit their environment. Humans, Kael notes, evolve despite it. When the environment becomes too fast, humans make themselves faster. When it becomes too deadly, they become the thing that death fears. They have turned the most basic biological functions, breathing, heart rate, and neural firing, into a manual transmission. While the rest of the galaxy is a slave to instinct, the human overclock allows them to take the wheel of their own evolution, even if only for a few minutes. It is a terrifying display of biological defiance that the Hegemony is still struggling to categorize. The most haunting revelation from Archivist Kael's research was not the physical toll of the overclock, but the psychological shadow it leaves behind. When a human pushes their mind into that high-frequency state, they aren't just processing data, they're detaching from their own identity. Kael calls this dissociative mastery. In his observations of Terran long-range snipers, he noted a chilling phenomenon. During the hours spent waiting for a target, the human brain activity is near dormant, a state of profound, cold meditation. But in the millisecond the target appears, their neural scans explode into a chaotic, brilliant whiteout. In that moment, Kael argues, the human ceases to be a person with a name, a family, or a history. They become a purely kinetic process. They describe it as becoming the bullet. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a literal description of their neural mapping. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self, actually decreases in activity, while the parietal lobe, which governs spatial orientation and mechanical action, takes over the entire cognitive budget. They effectively turn off their souls to become better killing machines. This leads to what Kael identifies as the feedback loop problem. Every time a human accesses the overclock, they find it easier to return to it. It is like a path being worn through a dense forest. The more you walk it, the deeper the groove becomes. The Hegemony found veterans of the Terran Wars who could no longer exist in standard time. To them, the normal pace of galactic life was agonizingly slow, like watching a glacier move. They became time junkies, individuals who only felt truly alive when their heart rate was screaming and the world was a blur of high-stakes decisions. This creates a class of warriors who are fundamentally incompatible with peace. Kael realized that the humans weren't just a military threat, they were a viral one. Their culture, their media, and their very language are designed to push the boundaries of cognitive speed. They are a species in a permanent state of acceleration, constantly looking for the next hit of adrenaline to justify their existence. The Hegemony was not just fighting a race. They were fighting a collective trying to outrun its own mortality by living every second at a lethal velocity. If the biological overclock is the engine, Archivist Kael concludes that Terran technology is the specialized fuel designed to make it explode. Unlike the Hegemony, which designs interfaces for ease, comfort, and safety, human engineers build cockpits that look like instruments of industrial trauma. They utilize neural link shunts, probes that bypass the slow chemical receptors of the skin and plug directly into the spinal column. Kael's team recovered the wreckage of a human Viper-class scout and was horrified to find that the control systems were not operated by hands, but by direct synaptic impulses. This creates a terrifying synergy. When a human enters the overclock, the machine does not just respond to their commands. It becomes an extension of their nervous system. In Kael's analysis, a pilot's brain begins to interpret the ship's hull integrity sensors as pain and its thrusters as limbs. When a human pilot feels the air getting heavy or senses an incoming missile, they aren't using psychic powers. They're processing the ship's sensor data at the same subconscious level a human feels a breeze on their skin, but at 1,000 times the speed. The speed of this integration is what shattered the Hegemony's tactical AI. Our computers are programmed to fight ships. They're not programmed to fight armored, nuclear-powered predators with human brains. A machine has a logic gate. A human in flow has an instinct. Kael observed a human pilot pull a maneuver that should have sheared the wings off his craft. The ship's AI screamed a warning, but the human's overclock allowed him to feel the exact point of structural failure and back off the throttle by a fraction of a percent at the perfect microsecond. This synergy allows them to weaponize gravity itself. They pull maneuvers they call slingshots, using the gravitational well of a planet to accelerate its speeds that would scramble the internal fluids of any other pilot. But for the Terran, the overclock turns that crushing pressure into a focal point of clarity. They have turned the cold, hard limits of engineering into a playground for their biological intensity. Kael realized that to beat a human, the Hegemony would have to outpaw. As Archivist Kael's research delved deeper into the human-machine melding, he discovered the most deceptive aspect of the overclock, the cognitive mirage. To an outside observer, a human pilot in this state looks like a god of cold precision. But inside the human mind, Kael's reconstructions reveal a chaotic, hallucinatory landscape. He managed to recover a sensory log from a pilot who survived a 40-minute engagement in the asteroid belts of Epsilon Eridani. What he found was not a record of a battle, but a record of a ghost world. The human brain, when forced to process data at such extreme velocities, begins to take radical shortcuts. It stops rendering the unnecessary details of reality to save on cognitive bandwidth. To this pilot, the asteroids weren't complex rocks. They were glowing red geometric shapes. The enemy ships weren't intricate machines. They were pulsing threat vectors with long, trailing tails showing their projected paths. Kael notes that the human mind effectively builds a simplified, high-speed simulation of the universe and projects it directly onto the pilot's retinas. They're no longer seeing the world as it is. They're seeing a tactical hallucination designed for one purpose: maximum lethality. This explains why human aces often report a sense of detachment or dream walking. They aren't consciously choosing to fire or dodge. They're simply reacting to the shapes in their dream. Kael realized this makes them immune to conventional psychological pressure. You cannot taunt or intimidate an enemy who doesn't even see you as a living being. To a human in the deep overclock, the galaxy is reduced to a high-speed game of geometry and reaction. Our attempts to broadcast signals of surrender or diplomatic pleas were ignored not out of malice, but because the human brain had literally filtered out the frequency of mercy to make room for more targeting data. This mirage is the final layer of the Terran defense. It protects their sanity from the sheer horror of their actions. By turning a massacre into a flow-state simulation, they can commit acts of extreme violence with the calm detachment of a child at play. When the overclock finally fades, the mirage collapses, leaving the human to deal with the physical and mental wreckage. But in the heat of the moment, that cold geometric clarity is what allows them to outthink the Hegemony's most advanced AI. As Kael's report warns, we are fighting an opponent who has turned their own sensory psychosis into a masterstroke of war. Every miracle has a cost, and for the Terrans, Archivist Kael concludes that the bill for the overclock is paid in the currency of their own biology. He began to analyze the afterburn phase, the period following a high-intensity cognitive spike. In the Hegemony, a soldier returns from combat and undergoes psychological reintegration. For a human who has spent 10 minutes living at 300% capacity, the return to normal time is a traumatic descent into a sensory desert. Kael monitored a Terran special operative who had successfully held a corridor against an entire boarding party for 6 minutes. When the adrenaline finally ebbed, his body didn't just collapse, it began to shut down in stages. The human heart, having been pushed to its mechanical limits, often develops microarrhythmias. The kidneys, flooded with the toxic byproducts of extreme muscle exertion and chemical fire, begin to fail. But the neurological damage is the most profound. Kael's team observed synaptic fraying, the literal physical degradation of the insulating sheaths around human nerves. To achieve the speed of a god, humans are willing to fry the wiring of their own consciousness. Many of their most decorated veterans suffer from what they call the gray, a permanent state of cognitive lethality where nothing in the real world feels fast enough or real enough to engage their interest. This is the hidden tragedy of the human overclock. Kael identifies them as a race of Icarus figures, constantly flying into the sun of their own potential and falling back to Earth with scorched wings. Yet, unlike the myth, they do not stop. They have built an entire culture around the glorification of this peak state. Their extreme sports, their high-frequency trading floors, and their competitive arenas are all training grounds for the overclock. They are addicted to the feeling of the universe slowing down, even if it shortens their lives by decades. This makes them even more dangerous to the hegemony. A species that fears death can be bargained with. A species that values the intensity of a moment over the longevity of a lifetime is a species that cannot be stopped by traditional deterrents. Humans aren't looking for a long, peaceful existence. They are looking for the perfect, high-velocity instant. To the hegemony, this is insanity. To the Terrans, it is the only way to truly be alive. Kael realized he was studying a race that views a 30-year life lived at full throttle as superior to a 1,000-year life lived in the slow, measured pace of the stars. As Archivist Kael delved into the final stage of his forensic study, he encountered a phenomenon that the Hegemony High Command refused to officially acknowledge. In classified dossiers, they referred to it as temporal displacement syndrome, but among the human survivors of the most intense conflicts, it has a much more visceral name, the ghost hour. Kael discovered documented cases where humans, while in the deepest state of the overclock, performed actions that seemed to violate the linear causality of the universe. This was no longer just about speed. It was a level of intuition that bordered on the impossible. During the defense of the Sol system, a human tactical officer named Sarah Vance ordered a fleet-wide shield frequency shift 3 seconds before the Hegemony's experimental tachyon beam had even finished its charging sequence. There was no sensor in existence, neither organic nor synthetic, that could have detected the charge up at that range. When Kael interrogated the captured bridge recordings, Vance didn't cite data, logic, or radar pings. She simply stated that she felt the air get heavy. To Hegemony scientists, this is a biological impossibility. But to a brain operating at the extreme edge of the overclock, the boundary between now and next begins to blur. Kael's theory is as terrifying as it is revolutionary. When a human brain is pushed to its absolute limit, it begins to process subconscious microvibrations and quantum fluctuations that are usually filtered out as background noise by more stable species. Humans aren't seeing the future. They are so deeply embedded in the present that they can see the ripples of events before the events themselves manifest. They have turned their primitive survival instinct into a form of biological precognition. This is the ultimate evolution of the overclock, the point where the mind outruns the body so completely that it starts to exist in the in-between. This realization sent a shockwave through the hegemony leadership. If humans can train themselves to navigate these ripples, then no amount of technological superiority can save their enemies. You cannot win a war against an opponent who is already reacting to your next move before you have even consciously decided to make it. The hegemony realizes they are fighting a species of short-range oracles who pay for their visions with their own neural health. They are breaking the fundamental rules of time just to stay on the board. The final conclusion of Archivist Kael's study is not a recommendation for war, but a plea for total isolation. He suggests that the hegemony has spent eons perfecting the technology of the external. Faster engines, stronger shields, and more efficient AI. We looked outward to conquer the universe. The humans, trapped in their fragile, short-lived bodies, looked inward. They conquered the now. By weaponizing their own adrenaline and turning their nervous systems into high-frequency conductors, they have achieved a level of parity with the cosmos that we can only simulate with supercomputers. Kael presents a chilling truth to the High Council. The Terrans are not fast in the way a machine is fast. They are fast because they have a higher resolution of existence. To them, the rest of the galaxy is a collection of statues. Slow, lumbering relics of a universe that the humans have already outpaced. Kael warns that to continue engaging them is to invite a catastrophic acceleration of their evolution. Every conflict is a forge, heating their minds to even higher temperatures and forcing them to find even deeper levels of the overclock to survive. His final report as Archivist Kael is simple. Do not provoke the Terrans. Do not attempt to match their speed. To do so is to invite a neural collapse that our biology cannot sustain. We must leave them to their own accelerating destiny. They are a species that burns bright and dies young. But in that brief flash, they see more than the hegemony will in a million years of steady, rhythmic life. They are the masters of the instant, the architects of the nanosecond, and the only creatures in the galaxy who can look at the end of the universe and say, I can make that last a little longer. The human overclock is not a weapon. It is a statement of intent. It is a declaration that even if the universe is cold, dark, and indifferent, a single human mind can ignite itself into a sun, if only for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, Kael concludes, they are invincible. If you found Archivist Kael's report on the Terran anomaly as haunting as we did, make sure to subscribe to Nova Frontiers and hit the bell icon. We're just beginning to declassify the files recovered from the Eye of Truth. If you want to see the next dossier on human pack bonding with non-sentient machines, let us know in the comments. Until next time, this is Nova Frontiers. Stay sharp, and remember, in a galaxy that moves at light speed, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stand still.